a list of,
Yeah, I asked Antonella to print some.
oh, great. Oh, that would be.
Yes.
I saw that. But
It's because the cover is not,
yeah, no,
the cover is not nice. It does not do it any favors. Look at it. Who came up with this cover? It's not what the book is about. And the main character would be so mad.
Isn't that ironic?
Yeah.
Probably whoever, yeah, whoever came up with it.
It's meant to be ironic, yeah.
Oh, but the irony probably gets lost because
Yeah.
all it is it looks like,
Chiclet.
yeah.
Yeah. But she's a real chemist who
Yeah.
works at a TV station doing a cooking show. And she's also beautiful, but she's a chemist and she wants to impart how cooking is chemistry. She wants to be a chemist on television,
Yeah.
not a beautiful woman doing a cooking show.
Yeah.
And that's the plot. That's the main storyline.
I'd like to, so then you think it's worth it.
I loved it. I think it's excellent. And the lady in the front also loved it.
Most of the women like spoken about it, but she have read it, really did. Like it.
Yeah,
So,
I think maybe. But again, it's the marketing that didn't do it any favors. But it does,
except that they
yeah,
did.
the book hates marketing. It talks about it.
So that's really ironic, except that the thing is probably is a smart marketing, which is most people, men will buy the chiclet. Then those.
And then be surprised by how it's shipped.
Exactly what I was.
Yeah, no, it's a good time.
It was so.
But our
Double-edged.
exactly, double-edged sword. I'm gonna.
Oh, yeah. Lunch one day, yeah. Oh. In the corner, yeah. The man, I think they had all those things, I don't know, but somebody told me. That. And when you have a friend,
It's easier for me than doing this like that. So last month when we did Women Talking, there was one gentleman who came in. Did anybody catch him? Yes, and I was like, and I know him from around from years ago, and I think he used to come. I'm not sure where I know him from. Maybe school libraries when I worked there. In any case, he came in, he sat at the back, and then when I started to describe the book and said that it was, did you catch him?
Yeah.
On a real life, unfortunately, a real life incident in which women had been raped and you know, attacked, violated at night, and then he, like, all of a sudden he got up and he walked out, and I thought, oh my goodness, this was like, it was, yeah, I guess he decided, oh, I guess he hadn't read the book and didn't know what it was about, and said, oh, this will be, you know, nice to come to the book club. And then thought, no, I don't want to be the only man sitting here, and this is going to be a very anti-male book. So
He was our August.
he was our August.
Yeah.
Maybe. Did you know him?
I know
Is he
him,
alive?
yeah. Yes, he's
Yeah.
a,
What was his name?
well, I'm not gonna out him. I will
No,
tell
no,
Kathy.
no, But
afterwards,
did you, I
but-
mean, I don't even know if I ever knew his name, but did he say anything? Did he come?
No,
to
not
anything?
afterwards,
No.
but he comes to lots of different programs. So I
Yes,
think he
yeah.
likes to sample, and I think
Yeah.
he came in and he realized, uh-oh.
I mean, maybe.
The
it's
book
like-
is called Women Talking. Everyone is a woman.
And then I had this line about how I didn't know what did it, if they were women or the book was called Women Talking, he should know it, or when I said what the book was about, and I thought, okay, so we haven't had a man in a really long time, and it didn't work out so well for last month. So, and I can say, good afternoon, ladies, and there's no gentleman here this afternoon. So please stay, don't walk out. Anyway. So, the book that we're gonna be, or I'm gonna be talking about today, well, maybe the other one, I'll have a discussion with, no. Who read the book?
No, I read the book. I haven't finished 50 pages.
Oh,
So
okay,
I don't
okay,
know, so I
okay.
don't know if that, big concern, but
yeah, well.
probably, because sometimes at the end.
I mean, there's just one couple of things you find out at the end about the narrator, so I don't know, since most people haven't read it. I don't think it's crucial, what do you think, Diana? I can talk about it, right? Or don't talk about the end, okay, I will talk about,
the end.
okay, I won't talk about the end,
No,
all right, no,
for me, you can.
oh, yeah, no, all right, no, so maybe I'm hoping that the others will read it at some point, and so, anyway, this is a very different story than, it's not so different, we're talking about women and books and jobs, actually, so it's very, have you read it, Fran?
No, I haven't, I'm waiting, I'm on the list.
You're on the list, okay, so I think you'll find it interesting. How did I come to find this book? I think I was listening to some interviews with authors about a different book that I was doing months ago, and the pardon?
Sorry, Upline, you were listening to Upline?
I don't know, maybe it was.
Right.
Right, but I don't know if it was that, it was one of these, somewhat, and the person reviewing it held up, I think she was maybe British. And, because you know how you get online and you go all over the place and everybody's reviewing books and mentioned and said, oh, and the next book that I'm going to be talking about is a book called There's No Such Thing as an Easy Job. And it's a very different read and it's fun and it's interesting. And if you want like a different culture, so I thought, oh, okay, this could be interesting if we can get it. And that's how I came to this, because I don't think it's very well known, at least definitely not in North America. It's translated from the Japanese. The title is There's No Such Thing as an Easy Job. I guess the cover also, similarly to the one, the lessons in chemistry, is a young woman. At least all you see is that she's got her head down like this on a desk, and it's pink and pale blue. So I guess this is like makes it look similarly to the other we were talking about it as a chick lit kind of cover. But it's not, and it's very interesting. And I'm glad that I came across it. So she's the author of the book, Kikuko Tsumura, which to me is, I'm saying this in anyway, Kikuko Tsumura. This is her first book to be translated into English. She's written other books in Japanese. She's a writer. She's a young woman in her early 40s, the author, and she's won a number of awards on the literary scene in Japan. But none of her work has been translated into English. So the idea of translation, I just wanted to say something about it because to me, it's fascinating. I have a couple of friends who are translators, really just French into English or English into French, but Japanese is a whole other ballgame. And so I thought, oh, that's like very interesting. Who does these translations? And this Polly Barton. So I looked her up because I thought maybe the name is very English sounding, but maybe she has a Japanese mother and I don't know, English father. But no, she's English, and like British English, which if you read the book, you know that the translation is a British English translation because of the words she uses, some of which I was familiar with, and a few of them, the more sort of esoteric ones, I wasn't. But in a way, for us Canadian, North American readers, there is not as much, of course, as Japanese to English, but there's another little layer of foreignness to it when the English is a very British English, and it really is a very British English. So I guess there was no other translation, or there was no need to change it around and to modify the terms for a North American audience. So it's left like that. The book is published by, I think it's Bloomsbury. It's Bloomsbury Publishing, which has a New York office. It's Truesgate because it's a British publisher, but it has a New York office. And the book was written originally, I think was published originally in Japan in 2015, because a couple of the reviewers said, oh, this is such a COVID era book, because, you know, as we all we sit at home at our desks and we don't go anywhere, or, you know, you walk a few feet to get your food and because everybody was working from home. So this is very much a COVID book, but it wasn't. It was written in 2015. The English translation came out in 2020. So yes, that was COVID era, but the book itself was not. It was written before. And so the translator, I went to look her up because I was really curious. How do you be like a British person speaking English and come to know enough Japanese to translate a 400-page book? I mean, to have your Japanese, so your English, your Japanese so good, because translation, literary translation is no easy feat. So I didn't really find out all that much about her. I mean, I watched her speak. She has her degree from Cambridge, and apparently she went to Japan to teach English after her undergraduate degree. And there she fell in love with Japan and things Japanese, and also had an affair with the Japanese married man, besides the point. But anyhow, so and I guess she learned Japanese well enough, which to me is like, I don't know, because it's
very well.
Yeah,
In order to
translate a book. And Japanese is not, the alphabet is totally different. It's signs, and there are references to it even in the book about the way a name is written, because if you do the character like this or that or something, and then it has different meaning. Like, how do you learn that language well enough to be able to translate? I have no idea. And the author doesn't speak English, because I found it finally, I was looking for interviews with the author, and I found an interview with the author, but her translator was Polly Barton, the translator of the book in the interview. That's how the interviewer for an American magazine managed to interview her. So to me, this is still a mystery. And as I said, I listened to a bit about an interview when Polly Barton was giving a lecture. She lives in Bristol in England now. She doesn't live in Japan. And she has this thing. She was a writer in residence at a university last year, where what she wanted to do, and it was in the translation faculty, and what she wanted to show that, or her philosophy of translation, is not being an invisible translator. And so this is an interesting concept for anytime we read literature in other languages, because when you're translating, technical translation is fine. You just want to get the meaning of whatever you're doing technically translated. But if you're translating literature, there's always this idea of you can't do it word for word. And if it's a totally different culture, as Japanese culture is, how do you express that? Like, it's very, and so she was trying to teach her students in the year that Polly Barton, the translator, was a scholar in residence, the art of translating, and not necessarily being an invisible translator, but having the translation as part of the literature, as part of the book. So it'll be a different, I don't know, none of us can read it in the original Japanese, so I don't know how, you would compare it to what it reads like. But in any event, here I think the translation is a really interesting part of the story. And I was really fascinated that this young British woman was able to go to Japan, and okay, she could teach English as a second language, but she was able to learn Japanese well enough to become a translator. And Polly Barton has translated several books by different authors. And you can imagine that if there's any Japanese literature that English publishers are interested in, that she would be one of the not so many people able to do the job. I don't know. Anyway, I thought this part was really interesting. So that's how the translation came to be. And this is the author's first book that's been translated into English. So I think the title is great. There's no such thing as an easy job. It has this nice ring to it. I don't know, how it reads in Japanese. And the book is, it's about finding an easy job. So yes, that's really what it's about. The structure of the book is a very simple one. It's divided into 5 sections. There is an unnamed narrator. We never know the narrator's name, which the author did on purpose because she wanted it to be like that. Wasn't so, but it could be this could be happening to anybody. And And the book is 5 length, the book is not such a short one, it's 400 pages, 399 pages in this edition. And, but it's a pretty quick read, divided into 5 sections of varying lengths. The first one is the shortest, 60 pages, then the next one is 70, 80, the last one 90. And each of the sections is a different job. So what's the premise of the book? When we meet the main character, our unnamed narrator, she tells us eventually, and after the first few pages, that she has left her previous job where she had worked 14 years because of burnout. That she just couldn't work anymore. She became so unwell that she had to leave her job and leave her profession. But now her unemployment benefits have run out. She's moved back home and she lives with her parents, who she tells us are in their mid-60s. They retired from their main jobs and they're both working part-time now. So they still do go to work. And she lives with them because she couldn't afford to live on her own anymore. But now she realizes that she has to do something until she's well enough to do, whether she will ever go back to whatever profession it is that she left. And we don't find that out until the very last few pages. Not that it's such a major mystery, but it's a little bit of a mystery because all the way through, you're wondering what kind of job did she do? And she makes allusions to it as the book goes on. So I was thinking maybe she was an investment banker, or she was a high-powered lawyer, because the way she talks about this being burnt out and working and overworking and long hours. That's what I thought. So I was a little bit surprised when I found out what she did, and it ties in with the ending. But what she does is when she realizes that she doesn't have enough money even to pay for her meals and her snacks, and she's a woman, so we find she's in her mid-30s. Again, we don't know her age exactly, but she tells us she's in her mid-30s, and we know that she's worked for 14 years after finishing college at her previous job. So she decides she has to work, but she wants an easy job. She wants a job that is not going to be demanding, that is not going to make her ill again, that she can handle. So it should be pretty monotonous, and she wants it to be close to home. So the first job that she gets is literally across the street from her home. And that's where I guess it had a little bit of a COVID feel. I mean, she does go to whatever work she does every day, but the first job is just across the street. So she said, I could go home for lunch, I could go home, if I need to go to the bathroom, like whatever she needs to do, it's very, very close. So she goes to an employment agency where there's this very lovely woman who provides a sense of calm and serenity and security for her, who finds her jobs. And this lovely woman, Mrs. Masakado, it finds her, the first job that she finds her is for a surveillance company. So the jobs are as follows, and so these are the chapter, or these long section chapters, headings of the way the book is divided into 5. The first one is the surveillance job. The second one is called the bus advertising job. The third one is the cracker packet job. Here you get this like British a little bit, right? Because we would say cracker package, right? And whereas the British would say cracker packet job. The fourth one is the postering job, which was putting up posters. And the last one is called the easy job in the hut in the big forest. So that's got the longest title, and that's her job. The easy job in the hut in the big forest. So as the book opens, it's a surveillance job. And she describes what's her job. She's sitting in a cubicle looking at 2 screens. And these are the screens where the footage of the person that is being spied upon or surveyed is shown. One is the current time, and the other one is from several hours ago. And she has to watch these screens, it turns out. And she has to watch this man who is being watched by the surveillance company, and that's all she has to do. So when she's gone to the employment agency and she's asked this lovely lady, she explained that she suffered from burnout in her previous job. And she wants something very, very easy, nothing to stress her. And so this lovely lady at the employment agency said, well, I've got something for you. They're looking for somebody. This is a job. And so who are they watching? They're watching a writer, which I thought was kind of funny because you think it's an author writing the book, and they're watching a writer, and he spends his days at home. I guess this is also maybe why this reviewer saw a little COVID era, but he's a writer. He works at home, doesn't have to get dressed if he doesn't want to. He's working on a novel, but then he seems to be working on all kinds of stuff. As she said, he works on all kinds of things. He writes for whoever pays him to write. He's a bit of an odd character, and she has to sit there for hours and hours and hours and watch him. But why are they watching him? What did this guy do? Like, he apparently unwittingly, unbeknownst to him, the author, is somebody of his acquaintances or friends or somebody he knows has been smuggling in contraband something, and they left it with him in a DVD. It's been brought in, so it's obviously something pretty small, in a DVD case, and it's somewhere in this author's he has thousands of DVDs. That's the problem. And whatever this contraband is somewhere in a DVD case amongst his enormous collection. But the surveillance company has been hired because they had a tip that eventually somebody is going to come and collect these smuggled goods. And so they're watching him. So cameras were planted in his apartment, and her job is to sit and watch and wait for a delivery or wait for somebody to come and ask for something, do something, and then they'll be able to swoop in and get this contraband stuff. But in the meanwhile, all she does is sit there. But that's the kind of job that she has asked for. And even these easy jobs have some side effects come to each job as she comes to learn. The first one in this job, besides being very boring and she gets, she has to sit there. I mean, she can stand up and she can sit down and she can sit as long as she keeps that. But she develops dry eye because she stares at the screen all day. So she has to apply a lot of eye drops. So there's all this description. You have to get in. I think the first chapter, the first section is the one that's the hardest to keep, at least I found. See, when you read it, which I hope you do, maybe it was a little slower.
The first two
you found
very slow, and then afterwards
it picked up. Yeah. It almost has the feel at one point maybe of 5 separate short stories, except that by the time you get past the first 2, then it starts, right? It starts to have more like a cohesive feel of a book. But the first one was kind of strange. And so she said, as she says, that I lived right across the street from the office, so my commute was a breeze. But when you weren't allowed to go home, the issue of how close your house was to your workplace became more or less moot. The benefit was that because I barely encountered anyone while working, I didn't need to give my appearance much thought. So sometimes I'd throw a coat over my pajamas and head to work like that. And on days when I had the time, I would pop back home and eat dinner before returning to the office. This whole situation, she finally tells us, because there's a few pages where we don't know why she's doing it. Like it's strange. And I'll tell you, on the cover of the edition of the book that I had, there is a little quote, and sometimes they have from reviews in publication, from the Observer, a British paper. And what's the quote? Just 3 words: surreal and unsettling. And I don't think it was surreal, and it wasn't.
I don't know. I was wondering if there's something about the Japanese culture, because it seemed like not very North American.
Well, so I think and I wanted to talk about that after that. That's also very much, was one of the reasons I enjoyed the book by the time I came to the end, was it was a real look at Japanese culture, and there is a very different feel to it. Like, and the food, there's so much description of food in this book. Beautiful descriptions of food. They're always eating lunch, and they're eating snack, and they're eating supper, and the lunches, and they bring it the different work. Yeah,
But it's interesting, the translator left the names of the food in the Japanese, so I was constantly going to Google Translate to figure out what is she eating, it sounds so good.
but were there North America, were there English equivalents of the food? Because weren't they
No.
Japanese?
They were Japanese, so I Googled it.
Yeah.
I Googled the names and I found a description.
Oh, description of what it was. Yeah.
Because it's interesting, she did not give English
Yeah,
explanation for what the foods were.
Right,
It's like the
right.
author wanted you to go.
to go
figure
and
out what she
to look
ate.
for it. Yeah. Which, I don't know, how did you feel? Like, I like that. No, and it makes you think a little bit and like you don't
Made me
want.
hungry.
It made me, I know, really, and then, I said, and I was just saying to somebody this morning that, and when you read it, and they bring their lunches, and it's not in bento boxes.
Yeah.
Which is I think they're the round, right?
Well, they sell, it just means lunch, like they sell
Lunch.
yeah, well, usually if you buy a bento box, it's because they're individual little containers.
Compartments.
But you can buy bento like at the train station, and all it means is you're getting a cafeteria style meal in a bunch of little containers. Like bento is so, it's like sushi. It's a word that they couldn't possibly
I didn't realize
carry
that.
over. But
So bento box is just.
it's like lunchbox, but
Lunchbox.
the way they do it is
Yeah.
everything is in individual containers. Like you wouldn't, it's not like North American food where everything is mixed in.
Yeah,
It's compartmentalized.
Exactly.
yeah.
And you wrap it up a certain way.
Yeah, that's
On
what
top.
they said, that's right.
And it all looks so, it sounds so beautiful, and every meal was with such care, and I thought, nobody just has a peanut butter sandwich, like it was these, anyway, so food, so food and culture, which is really what the book is really interesting to me, it was interested for. So she says here, this whole situation had come to be because I sat down one day in front of my recruiter and informed her that I wanted a job as close as possible to my house. Ideally, something along the lines of sitting all day in a chair, overseeing the extraction of collagen for use in skincare products. I mean, she was giving that as an example of something that she could see doing because it involved very little use of one's brain. I didn't really think she would be able to oblige, but I figured I had nothing to lose by asking. I'd quit my previous job after I developed burnout syndrome and had gone back to living with my parents in order to recuperate. After a while, my unemployment insurance ran out, and I figured I'd better start looking for another job. I'd left my last job because it sucked up every scrap of energy I had until there was not a shred left. But at the same time, I sensed that hanging around doing nothing forever probably wasn't the answer either. In short, I felt pretty confused about whether I wanted to go back to work or not, and that was why I'd come out with that line to the recruiter, which sounded like I thought the whole thing was a joke. As soon as it was out of my mouth, I figured it was going to get me in trouble. But instead, Mrs. Masakado shot me a knowing glance that seemed totally out of place with her otherwise meek manner. "I've got just the thing for you." I swear I saw her glasses glint like they do when cartoon characters come out with these kinds of lines. Then she handed me the description for this job. There was no denying that it was exactly the type of thing I was looking for. Yet, as fate would have it, it turned out to have its own specialized set of hardships. And that's where she learns that there's no such thing as an easy job. So besides the eye problem, so she explains to us, Yame, and I'm pronouncing this right, Yame Yamamoto, the guy I'd been assigned to watch over, earned his living as a writer. Unbeknown to him, he had been entrusted with some kind of smuggled goods by an acquaintance. I know that as contraband went, this was hot stuff, but they wouldn't tell an underling like me exactly what it was. I'd been informed that the contraband was hidden away in a DVD case, but that Yame Yamamoto's film collection was so ridiculously extensive that they were unable to locate the case in question during the unofficial shakedown they'd given the place while the target was out. Instead, they'd installed a bunch of cameras in there, and now we were watching out for when his acquaintance would come by to collect it. Or else for when, by some miracle, Yame Yamamoto decided to go to sort through his DVD collection and come across the contraband himself. There was a possibility that given the size of Yamamoto's collection, he may well have lost track of which of his DVDs were borrowed. Also, since the individual who handed over the contraband had so far managed to evade arrest, thanks to Yamamoto's oblivious guardianship, it was also conceivable that he or she might think to entrust him with another load. That was what I've been told by my supervisor, Mr. Somea. Hence my having to be on high alert whenever a delivery came. So that was when she had to be on alert, when she could sort of doze off in between. But if anybody rang the doorbell, there was any kind of delivery, that's when she had to pay attention. So, and then it describes her first boss. And her first boss and her bosses in all these jobs are men. So what I found so interesting is that a couple of the reviewers jumped on this book as being a piece of, it's feminist literature and it wants to deal with gender issues and how women get the short end of everything. And Japan is a very patriarchal society, and it's the men in Japan who have the main jobs. But when she's asked in the interview, which I thought was very interesting, I didn't read it as such. I read it that she had whatever job she had before that caused her to burn out because and as we see, as the chapters progress, we find out that the reason may be that there's no such thing as an easy job. Maybe there isn't. Every job comes with, no matter what it is, from the lowest level to the highest, all jobs have their pros and cons. But it turns out that she is such a conscientious, hard worker that even when she gets the most mundane and simplest of jobs, she puts so much effort into it and she just can't help it. That's who she is. But she says when she's asked, this is like, and so it's funny because I read a few of these reviews and they said this is a feminist, post-capitalist book. And I'm thinking, post-capitalist book? Like, okay, Japan is a capitalist society. I mean, it has a free economy, which is a capitalist economy, but I don't know. And this whole gender business that the women are being subordinated to the men. And then when a reviewer asked her, the interviewer, in this one interview I managed to find, asked her, she said, no intention of doing that. I mean, it wasn't my intention at all to make this into the men, that the women are subservient to the men. Maybe because that's the culture she's used to, because she's Japanese, the author, and this is where she grew up, or she never had that intention. So that also made me think, besides the issue of translation and how interesting and difficult it must be to learn Japanese and translate when your Japanese is your second language, you're British, but also this idea of reviewers sounding off, and for very prestigious reviewing papers and journals, that this is a book about women being subordinated to men and gender identity and gender roles. And then you come across an interview with the author and she says, no, I never had any intention of saying that. So I thought, okay. Also, you beware a little bit with all these reviews that you read about books, because sometimes motives are assigned to the author that they had no intention, and in this case, apparently she did it. So anyway, so she's describing this, and it was the first introduction into the Japanese working world. So this is a surveillance company, and so it's not very beautiful. They sit in these rooms, and everybody sits in their cubicle, and they stare at these screens, and they watch whoever they're supposed to be watching. But then it's the food. So the food are the breaks from the monotony. And if you've ever done jobs that are really not so exciting, menial jobs or repetitive jobs, then food breaks, whatever, it's the coffee break in the morning and the lunch break and the coffee break in the afternoon, they're very important. And especially when the job consists, as her first job did, of by herself staring at the screen, not really interacting with anybody. So the idea of taking a break is interesting, and also maybe if you could meet somebody to talk to and get some human interaction, that also is interesting. So in this first job, where do they have there's no cafeteria, but there's a shop for the company. And as she said, it kind of was built like an afterthought, because it's like, the way she describes it, it's a room, more like a hole in the basement of this building. So the building, the employees sit on floors, and to go to the shop, she discovered you have to go downstairs. It's one room, a woman runs it. She seems to be there all day and all night because the author goes down at 9 o'clock in the evening to get something to eat. The prices are very, very expensive. And I don't know, I didn't do the conversion into Japanese yen about what, but everything seems very expensive. And she comments how expensive it is. But the first thing is when she goes downstairs at 9 o'clock one night to buy herself something to eat because she's hungry. And she buys herself a whatever kind of roll of something she buys. And then there's this description about, oh yeah, here. So she says here, I walked down the clean, clinical looking corridor, its fluorescent lights disconcertingly bright, until I reached the stairs at the far end and descended into the basement shop. The building didn't have a basement exactly. It was just that the shop, which was underground, it was just the shop which was underground, like it had been created in some kind of a sinkhole. As might be expected in a place whose entire raison d'etre was to check surveillance footage around the clock, the lights in the building stayed on throughout the night. So because of the nature of the job, it's also a little bit like, I know it's not creepy, but that's, the lights are on all the time. They weren't the regular fluorescent lights you found in shops either, but the light fixtures used in the white night nations. Spend a lot of time here and soon you started to feel your sense of night and day melting away. But the lighting in the basement shop, which was about the size of an average single bedroom, was disconcertingly dim, even in the daytime. It was like the building contained two different zones, the shop and everywhere else. Actually, given the choice, I would have preferred to be working in the shop, I thought conspiratorially as I placed my yakisoba roll and a plastic bottle of mate down on the counter. Both of these items were needless expenses. Okay, granted, in order to make a yakisoba roll, I'd have to first stir fry the noodles with cabbage, then find a roll to stuff them in. So the expense was perhaps justified, but the mate I could easily have made at home if I'd only had the leaves. So forking out the plastic bottle of the stuff brought with it a sense of defeat. I'll take these. Even my voice had a glum ring to it. That's 290 yen, please, said the shop lady. She sounded surprisingly businesslike for 9 p.m. on a Thursday night. Whenever I went into the shop, it was always the same woman working there. Just like with Mr. Somea, that he's her supervisor upstairs. I had my doubts about whether she ever actually went home. So she says, and that's the first description of the food and the whole different culture. So this is the first place she's working at. And she watches and she watches, and as the chapter goes on, she starts to find this interesting, I mean, again, it's this surreal and unsettling. It's not really surreal. I mean, there are elements that are unsettling, just like there are unsettling elements in life, was that she comes to find, as she finds out from her colleagues, there's one woman who she talks to who sits in the next cubicle, that after a while, when you're watching somebody for an extended period of time, you can start to identify with the person. So she says, and she's watching this guy like 24 hours a day. So she's watching him when he eats. So then she starts to want to eat what he wants to eat. And she's watching him, as he, and she finds that a little bit strange. And finally, at the end of this section, about 60-something pages in, the person who gave him the contraband, which turns out was somebody he knew, the acquaintance turned out to be a young female editor who Yame Yamamoto had worked with a few times and who had been smuggling illegal gems from overseas under the guise of researching a special feature on ecotourism. So she comes back to collect the gems, and finally, by definition, so this assignment is over. So now she has to decide, but she's been very good at her job and her supervisor has been pleased with her work. And so he said to her, you can, we have other assignments. We'd like to hire you. She was just hired temporarily. And she said, I don't know. She doesn't know what to do. She thinks about it, but she says, I just, something just didn't go right for me. So I shook my head, especially Because what she, wait, I'm gonna tell you all the little details, but she decides, no, she's not gonna renew it. That was enough. That surveillance job, for once, she decides no. So she has to look for another job. So that's how the next chapter, so every time she needs another job, the book has another section. So she has to look for another job. She goes back to the employment center. She looks at the list of the latest vacancies. But meanwhile, as she says, my brain was more consumed with the question of what I should eat, where I should eat dinner on my way home. And then I heard someone say my name. It was Mrs. Masakado, the recruiter who had introduced me to the surveillance job. And Mrs. Masakado says to her, so I heard you didn't renew your contract at the surveillance company. And she says to her, no. And Mrs. Masakado says, you know, the person who called us seemed very disappointed because he said it was such a shame. They finally found a person who was so well suited to the role. And that's what they kept saying to her. You're so well suited to this job. You could just, and she's thinking, what do you mean well suited? All you have to do is sit there and stare at this computer screen. But apparently it can make people, crazy. So she was able to do it. And her supervisor was disappointed. And so anyway, but she says, no, I don't think so. So she says, she asked Mrs. Masakado, well, Mrs. Masakado says to her, so what would you like? And she says, I see here on your resume that this is the employment recruiter saying to her that you gave personal reasons as why you left your first job. And she tells us, I had read, this is our narrator saying, I had read on the internet that it was okay to cite personal reasons for a whole host of circumstances. Even when submitting a full-blown resignation, the article had informed, good old personal reasons would see you through the majority of cases. Whether you'd had a boss who made barbed comments about you at a half-hourly rate, or you've been blamed for the disappearance of a document mentioned on the job sheet that had never existed in the first place, or your colleagues had spread horrible rumors about you, or you've been held responsible for ruining a business deal. Whatever the reasons were, personal reasons was your go-to. You could just say that. So, but she says that that explanation didn't seem to be landing too well with my recruiter, the lovely Mrs. Masakado. And so then she tells her, well, I find my other job was burnout. But this job, I found it hard sitting at a desk all that time. And because I was working overtime, I ended up doing very long hours. So it really was a great job, but I decided it wasn't for me. I would only have ended up inconveniencing the company if I would have carried on, which seems like a very Japanese way of saying, you know, I'm so sorry. I would have inconvenienced the company, so that's why I left. And then Mrs. Masakado says, really? I mean, are you really sure? I don't know if you could know, but okay. Because you said to me, you requested a job that was like watching over collagen extraction, didn't you? And so anyway, she finds her another job. And what's this next job? This is the bus company job where she has to help write advertising. So it seems like there's this bus that has a particular route in this, one of the bus routes in a bus company's series of routes, and they want an advertising, well, they decided not to contract it out. The bus company has asked that somebody be hired to write the ads that are going to be broadcast on this bus route, and they should be related to businesses that are along the way that the passengers sitting on the bus will see as they travel on this bus. And this bus company is called the Albatross Bus Company. So it's kind of a funny name. And so this is her next job. And it turns out that she's very good at it. And she learns to write. She works with a very nice young woman who's younger than her. She says 10 years younger than me at least. It says this mid-30 woman in her mid-30s. So this much younger woman than her shows her the ropes of this job. And she starts to write these adverts for the bus, and adverts. And so that's a Britishism also, because we would say ads, but in the book, it's a British translation. So the adverts for this bus company, which seems like pretty straightforward. You know, somebody goes and checks, okay, there's this restaurant here, there's this flamenco dance school over here, and there's this, I don't know, whatever the different businesses along. Let's write something. They go and they ask another employee in the accounting department, and Mrs. So-and-so, who has a very nice radio voice. It's decided that she records it. So they're doing this very in-house. So this is the second job that she goes to. And something about this job also towards the end of it seems a little bit odd. The businesses are closing and the businesses are opening. But not only that, when she's hired at this job, the man who hires her says to her, and I'd like you to keep an eye on Ms. Araguchi. Ms. Araguchi is the young woman who she works with, this lovely colleague who shows her, who writes and edits the ads along with her. But why? And coming from the surveillance company, it's kind of like a link into the second chapter that she's asked, as she's hired, to keep an eye on her colleague. And she says to her, the man who hires her, I don't understand. What do you mean? Like, what am I supposed to be looking out for? And he says, just something. Like, if you notice anything happening or not happening or something strange happening, just let me know. So this is a little bit cryptic. But anyways, she goes on to that second job. Of interesting things happen at that job, but it turns out at the end of it, nothing terribly bizarre happens, but it comes that job too. But then you get the descriptions of these bus ads, and again, a little more about the company culture, because there's a couple more people that she interacts over here with. And by the end of that job, you have more descriptions of food and nice lunches and where people go out to eat and the different. And so, as I said, for me, part of the interest of the book was learning about Japanese society through this story, by the kinds of food that they eat and by the way that they talk to their co-workers, the relationships that they have. They bow, as she says, every time they leave or they meet somebody, they bow to each other. So that's still very much a thing that's done. And this is very contemporary. This is modern, and this is on the outskirts of a decent sized city. So this is not, country folk. And Japan is a very technically advanced society anyways. So she enjoys this. This is interesting until this too comes to an end, because the bus route that wasn't doing very well, the Albatross bus route, all of a sudden, because of what happens in this section, is doing fine. And so they don't need any new adverts written because things are going along okay. And the parent bus company is no longer talking about canceling that bus route. So that job ends. She goes on to her next job, which she gets through the second one, where she is. And of all it also seems a little bit absurd, but she has to write the little blurbs on the back of these cracker packages. The cracker packages are small, and there's all different kinds of crackers. And it seems like crackers, at least by the time I finished this book, I really did also get the urge to buy some very good different kinds of crackers, because there's so much talk about crackers, but really good ones, and the flavor. And this one is got wasabi flavored, but a little slight wasabi, and this one has, this kind of flavored, and this one is hoisin sauce, and crackers. I guess they're very much a part of Japanese, a part of the Japanese diet, because when she goes home, her mother is eating crackers, and she goes and she checks what kind of crackers her mother is eating. And then her mother asks her to bring home some crackers from when she has. So, but on the back of the packages of the crackers, this company has, one of their marketing tactics is they have information. So it's either facts of different, and they have series. So let's say one series on a certain set of cracker packages is, flowers of Japan. And another one is, mountains or like anything. And so she has to write this stuff. Turns out she's very good at this too. So you see, whatever she does, from just staring at a screen and watching somebody, because she caught the guy, like she was obviously, awake, thank goodness, when the person came and to pick up the contraband, but she was able to write these bus ads, and now she seems to be very good at writing these bits. And she also has to come up with ideas, so it's not just a simple job, because she writes them, but then there's a new kind of cracker, and one series only runs a certain for a certain length, and then you have to come up with something else. So this could be a never-ending position. And she comes up with the idea of also giving, then they create a cracker with a picture, a cartoon picture of a very large, pleasant lady, Mrs. Fuji, I forget what her name was, Mrs. Fujikama, and an imaginary character. And they have her saying things. So she has to write the sayings that this cartoon character would say. And eventually it turns out that there is a real woman by that name who comes, who contacts them, and then who shows up and offers to work for the cracker company. Pardon?
No,
For no pay. And that's when our narrator gets a little nervous because this, so it's become an advice column on the back of these cracker packages from Mrs. Fujikama. But people love it. The consumers love it. They're buying these crackers. Except when the real lady comes, she seems to be a very genteel, kind, intelligent, older woman. And she is going to voluntarily, at no pay, help with this and help write the ads and decide which bits of advice she's going to dispense. And so our narrator gets nervous and decides she doesn't want somebody coming and usurping her position. So she doesn't continue that job either. Goes back to the recruiter who finds her the postering job. And this is a strange, this is an odd kind of job. What's the job? She has to go to work. This one guy who seems to be a graphic designer, and he has posters and they're public service announcements like drive carefully, don't forget to drink water when it's hot outside, don't waste water, don't litter, posters that she is to go, because she says, maybe I'm ready for something a little more active, like I can go outside and I can move around, because first she told her recruiter that she wants to sit at a desk. Now she's had enough of sitting at a desk, so she gets this job. So she has to go around an area of town or the outskirts of town, putting up posters. And the guy she works for tells her, he's an interesting fellow, tells her, but if you see posters, because when you're going to go, you're going to see that there are posters by this up from this company that's called Lonely No More. And it's a company that advertises that, are you lonely? So it's appealing to the lonely people. Come, we have socials, we have teas, and they have a place, and you can come, I think, 3 times a week, and dinners, and you'll meet people. And he says to her, you put the posters, you cover up the posters of this organization, which is kind of bizarre, but she does it, or put them next to them. And so that's what she has to do. And it's a little bit mysterious. And then you find out that this organization, I mean, there's something a little bit creepy about this organization, it turns out. And at the end of that chapter, you find out why this guy who's telling her to do this, the graphic designer of these public service posters, is telling her to put them up, and what this organization has been doing, which is not such a surprise because you kind of figure it as it's going on. And then, but that ends, that position comes to an end. So once again, she needs one more job. Well, we don't know which one, but it's going to be one more job. And the last section of the book is called The Easy Job in the Hut in the Big Forest, where as she's getting more and more outdoorsy, like the other job was putting up posters, so she was walking around outside with her paste and her thing and putting up her posters. She goes to this beautiful park, a national park in the outskirts of the city, where they're looking for someone to sit in a hut in the forest and just sit there. I mean, she can go out, they give her this ATV to drive around to check the surroundings, and she can mark trails, and she's there in case someone gets lost. No cell service out there, so they give her a walkie-talkie. But this hut is all by herself, which she's not so thrilled with, but she does it, and it's a very beautiful place, and it's very calming. She's found out though that the last person, and it seems to be that the last people who do the jobs in some of these jobs had left suddenly and had been had left, like, also being burnt out. So there's something about this idea of being burnt out from one's job that goes through it. The last section is like where everything comes together and where we find out the little bits of information that we didn't know all along, as I say, what kind of work she did, which is nothing, but I'm not going to tell you because I thought, oh. And it ties up nicely with the ending. And there's a little bit of a mystery. It kind of becomes like a cozy mystery in that last section. And it ties in one of the characters in the last section of the book is also, suffered from burnout at his job. And it has a nice ending in that she decides after all these temporary, not so easy jobs, that she's feeling better after the year and thinks that she's ready to go back into her profession. But she has discovered that there's no such thing as an easy job. Apparently, over the last decade, there has been renewed attention in literature paid to the nature of work. Well, I should say, because this other one, this lessons in chemistry, exactly, but we should do this one too. But particularly in the novels recently translated from Japanese into English. So there's another one that sounds interesting. I don't know if anybody read it or heard of it, called Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata, published in 2016, which presents an example of how someone can find purpose and comfort in something that others might consider a dead-end job. So that book was entitled The Convenience Store Woman. Another one was called The Factory, published 10 years ago, or translated 10 years ago, which delves into the alienating nature of labor, regardless of prestige. And it's set in a factory where each character finds their job stifling. And so here we have this one, there's no such thing as an easy job, that kind of falls in, and I'm sure a lot more in Japanese, but these are the two that have been translated into English. And I remember, I guess we've all heard, or at least used to be, that Japan was known or had a reputation for its very discriminatory and male-oriented and very, at times, toxic work culture. And it used to be, what work was like in Japan, was based on that corporate model that boomed in the post-World War II era, that individuals, most often young men, would be recruited straight out of college and work their way up the corporate ladder over decades, remaining with the same company for the whole career, for their whole lives. And that was the Japanese corporate model that was in place after World War II. By now, in 2023, apparently it's not quite so. Many aspects are still there, but others, this image is outdated, according to this article, because I don't know, but there are other aspects of labor that deserve, having a look at and being paid attention to. And this is what this book does, that there's no such thing as an easy job. And so what this book does is it looks at how our working lives impact us and on the ways that our work lives spill over into our personal lives. And so, as I said to you, this novel, what it does, it follows our unnamed narrator, and we never know her name, and I guess it doesn't really matter, who has left, we know from the beginning, her 14-year career with burnout, and goes through this series of 5 temporary jobs. And she said, as the narrator says, I had left my last job because it sucked up every scrap of energy until I had nothing, not a shred left. But at the same time, I sensed that hanging around doing nothing forever probably wasn't the answer either. So by the end of all of these, and as I said, each chapter focuses on these temporary jobs. And each chapter follows a similar structure in that the kindly employment agent finds her a job, passes the narrator a job description that seems initially straightforward. The narrator accepts the position, and often, if you notice, she's the only applicant to the job too. Like it's that, how come they're so eager to have her? Oh, they're so excited to see somebody apply that they have an applicant for the job. So then maybe that's, you know, a little bit, like, the jobs might be a little bit odd. And everything goes smoothly at each of the 5 jobs for the first few weeks. But over time, the narrator begins to run into strange situations that disrupt the routine that she has created for herself. And sometimes we find these scenarios have to do with her coworkers or with new responsibilities that weren't on the job description that unexpectedly pop up. For example, when she's working at the one with the postering, as someone who hangs up and replaces posters in various neighborhoods, she finds herself pulled in to the intrigue surrounding a suspicious social club, this Lonely No More, geared to those who are lonely. And in the last section, where she's working at an easy job in the hut in the big forest, she begins to notice that something's a little odd here. Her belongings look like somebody has been there and rifled through them, or what serving of her soy sauce or her soup something is not there. And she's sure there were 3 servings left, and now there are only 2 servings when she comes back from her trip around checking her terrain on her ATV. It's a bit strange, and kind of made me think of in the first chapter, because there was also references to maybe, because her character, the author, at one point says he believes in ghosts, and there's a whole discussion of ghosts. So are there ghosts populating the various jobs here? Is this some kind of a Japanese something? But each job has its own challenges, the narrator finds out, and its own emotional demands. However, she was determined not to do anything of that nature. And eventually each spills out into an odd series of events that precipitates her moving on. And so that's what this book is about. Finally, at the end, where she comes to the realization, she finishes up that last job. She says, the time had come to embrace the ups and downs again. I had no way of knowing what pitfalls might be lying in wait for me, but what I had discovered by doing 5 jobs in such a short span of time was this: the same was true of everything. You never knew what was going to happen, whatever you did. You just had to give it your all and hope for the best. Hope like anything, it would turn out all right. And so it has like a nice ending after all the things that go on. I thought it was a very fun read. As I say, maybe the first chapter was a little bit slower, or it took, I don't know, you said.
Okay, generally the whole thing was all right, but I found it was strange. I didn't finish yet, so I don't know. But the last job was the strangest things were happening in that job.
Yeah.
The 5th job in the park.
Yeah. Which turned out to have an explanation, so.
Yeah, but no, but certain things to me didn't have any explanation, like when he went to make holes in the
You'll
fence.
see, you'll see.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
you'll see. It'll all, it's all, and then it's like perfectly, oh yeah, of course, there's nothing so strange about that once you find out. So in this interview, in the interview through Polly Barton, her translator, she says, the interviewer says to her, what does she say? I know because it's after 3 o'clock, but she said, what was your goal? She asks the author, in criticizing, in my view, this is the interviewer saying, in my view, some of the pitfalls of late capitalism. I never thought that this was a critique of late capitalism. What do you want to say or highlight about work? And so the author answers, in essence, I set to write out this book as a series of practical experiences of a narrator undertaking imaginary jobs. But thinking about the way that the protagonist drifts between jobs, it strikes me that what I really wanted to say to people was, work isn't all hardship, and it isn't all joyous either. Some jobs you'll be suited to, and others you won't. So please don't give up hope. That was her message. Never mind what all the critics decide to say. And she says that, and apparently, so it was interesting. And if you read about the author, which is not much to find, again, I don't know, because it's Japanese and not much has been translated, it will say that Kikuko Tsumura suffered from a burnout at work, and she suffered from workplace harassment at her job. So the interviewer for this magazine says, in the about the author section,
It's
No, I
in
don't know.
there too.
but it does somewhere. It says in the about the author section, there is a note about your own experience of workplace harassment early on in your career. It's one of the first thing I learned about you. It says, in her first job out of college, Tsumura experienced workplace harassment and quit after 10 months and retrained. An experience that inspired her to write stories about young workers. Why include that for readers? So she answers, which I thought was good. She says, well, if I'm going to be honest, it's included because the publisher wanted to put it there. But which I touche again, like when they tell us this about gender this and women's and she thought, no, that was not what I meant to do. So here's well, because the publisher thought this would look good. But the reason that I don't hide my having experienced workplace harassment in the past was because I wanted to show people who are having a hard time with that kind of thing that they're not alone. So she had her reason. She said, I never translated this book, never imagined my book being translated into English. And I wrote it very freely in Japanese in the way that I wanted to. So the very fact that you've read the book now, like you English speaking reader, is somehow surprising to me because part of me didn't even expect the Japanese audience to relate to it. So the fact that finding a reception with an overseas audience is making me think that maybe the essence of work is something universal, that it doesn't change between countries. That's both fascinating to me and somehow reassuring. And then the final question, because then I'll stop. People have to go. How much of the book is personal? She's asked. And she says almost none of the novel is based on my personal experience. The large majority is written from my imagination. Because the only thing maybe you could say, because the first character who's being watched is an author, she's an author. The background to the fifth and final job, the job in the small hut in the big woods, is that there is a park in Osaka, she lives in Osaka, called the Expo Commemoration Park, which is dotted with huts. And I've always thought that it would be great to work in one of them. So the interviewer in the magazine says, so if you had to take a break from writing and try an easy job, is that where you would go? Yes, I'd still like to work in a hut in a big wood. Being alone in a quiet place, managing some particular task is my ideal kind of job. And I often fall into reveries about that kind of work. There's an element too, there's no such thing as an easy job, which is about indulging that